Welcome to K-Drama for Sleep, where your favourite K-dramas turn into soft, soothing stories to drift off to. Imagine living a life where you hide your pain behind a smile and convince yourself you don't need anyone. A caregiver who spent his life taking care of others, a children's book author who hides her wounds behind coldness, and a brother who sees the world differently, find their lives slowly intertwining, bound by past scars they've never healed from. But as they begin to open up, old memories resurface, and the deeper they grow closer, the more they're forced to face the pain they've been running from. And the hardest part? Learning that healing doesn't mean forgetting, it means finally allowing yourself to feel. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe so you can fall asleep to more of your favourite K-drama stories. So, get comfortable, relax your mind, and let the story gently carry you into sleep. The story opened like a bedtime tale told in a darkened room. A young girl lived alone in a castle, and one day she went down into the village hoping to find a friend. She brought what she thought were gifts. 2 small dead birds cradled gently in her hands, and could not understand why the children screamed. The villagers whispered that she was a monster, a girl who walked beneath the shadow of death. Furious, the girl wandered to a lake and began pulling fish from the water and crushing them under her shoes. On her 3rd cast, the line came up heavier than expected, and she dragged from the water not a fish but a young boy, half frozen, half drowned, half saved by accident. From that moment, the dark shadow that had followed the girl chose a new companion. It followed the boy instead. The boy began to follow the girl everywhere. She asked, almost shyly, if he would always stay by her side, and he promised that of course he would. Then she turned to him and tore a butterfly apart in her small hands, and asked, with a strange light in her eyes, whether he would still stay even after seeing that. The boy ran. The shadow returned to the girl, and the girl's mother, somewhere just out of frame, whispered the same thing the village had whispered, that no one would ever stay, because she was a monster. The animation faded, slowly, and the girl in the castle became a woman in the world. Her name was Go-moon Young. She was one of Korea's most successful children's book authors, and she was, by almost any conventional measure a person could apply, terrifying. We met her over a quiet meal at an upscale restaurant, where a small fan and the girl's mother approached her table for an autograph. Moon Young looked the child over with a strange, unsmiling interest, and then leaned in close and asked her, very sweetly, if she wanted to be pretty. Because in all of her fairy tales, she explained in a near whisper, the witch was always the prettiest one in the room. The little girl burst into tears and ran. Moon Young watched her go without changing expression. Later, she ran a knife along the edge of her plate just to hear the sound it made, sliced her own fingertip on the blade to test the sharpness, then dropped the knife into her purse like a souvenir she had earned. Across town, on the same kind of grey afternoon, a young caregiver named Moon Kang-tae sat in a university classroom, listening as a professor gently explained that his older brother Sang-tae could no longer attend their program. Sang-tae had become overwhelmed, earlier that week, by the noise of construction equipment outside the window, and the school could no longer guarantee anyone's safety. Kang-tae listened without arguing, the way a person listens when they have heard the same kind of news in the same kind of office many times before. There was a thinness to him, not in his body, which was strong and squared and steady, but in his eyes, the kind of thinness that comes from being 20-some-odd years old and never once having had a single day off from being responsible for another human being. He looked up after a moment and saw Sang-tae watching him through the small glass pane in the door, and instead of letting his exhaustion show on his face, he stood up, walked out into the hall, knelt down so they were eye to eye, and asked his brother quietly if he was hungry. That evening, the two brothers walked away from yet another school in yet another town. Sang-tae offered to pay for dinner because he was the older brother, and that was what older brothers were supposed to do. It was the first glimpse the story gave us of who these two men really were to each other. Not patient and caregiver, not burden and provider, but family, in a way that was tired and sweet and stubbornly tender. Kang-tae worked the night shift at the OK Psychiatric Hospital. He was the kind of caregiver other caregivers studied when they thought he wasn't looking. Calm with violent patients, gentle with frightened ones, unflappable when a young woman with an eating disorder mistook him for her boyfriend and clung to him while sobbing about how he had cheated on her. His body, when he changed for his shift in the locker room, was covered in old scars, long ones along his back, smaller ones across his ribs, the kind of scars a person doesn't get from clumsiness. He never spoke about them. He moved hospitals every spring, every single year, and when colleagues asked why, he would give them a flat, joking answer that closed the conversation before it could open into anything real. A new patient was admitted that week, a man with severe anxiety who had attempted to take his own life and his daughter's. The daughter, a small girl named Go Yun, was placed in care for trauma. The father, Mr. Kim, was put in restraints. And in a coincidence, the story was carefully arranging without yet showing its hand. Both Moon Young and Kang-tae would arrive at that same hospital that same day. Moon Young had been booked for a children's reading event. She arrived in a long black dress, smoking a cigarette near the entrance, and Kang-tae, passing by on his break, asked her politely to put it out. She turned to face him, and in that moment cherry blossoms began drifting through the air around them, the way they do in stories that want you to pay attention. "Do you believe in destiny?" she asked. He didn't answer. He tried to take the cigarette from her hand. She crushed it into his coffee instead, told him destiny was overrated, and walked away. He crushed the paper cup in his fist and watched her go. The reading itself was interrupted when Mr. Kim, freed from his restraints by an inexperienced caregiver, slipped into the auditorium searching for his daughter. He found her backstage, terrified, and tried to coax her into running away with him. "Children can't survive on their own," he told her. "We should just die together." And from the shadows behind him, a voice that was neither child nor caregiver said with cold precision that what he was saying was bullshit. Moon Young stepped out of the dark and told the trembling man he was the most worthless person she had encountered in a long time. He lunged at her. She knocked him down with her purse. The knife she'd stolen earlier slipped out and skittered across the floor, and she crushed his hand with the heel of her shoe before he could reach it. Enraged, the man overpowered her and began to choke her, and for a moment, Moon Young smiled at him, almost amused, until his face blurred and she saw instead the face of her own father from many years ago, telling her it'll all be over soon, as he tightened his hands around her throat. Kang-tae burst into the room and pulled the man off her. They struggled. And then Kang-tae saw Moon Young coming at the man with the knife, and without thinking, without pausing to calculate the cost, he caught the blade in his bare hand. Blood dripped onto the floor. They stared at each other, and Moon Young, breathing hard, said the strangest thing. So it wasn't destiny after all. The injury cost him his job. The hospital needed someone to take the fall for letting Mr. Kim escape, and Kang-tae moved every year anyway, so he handed in his badge without arguing very much. Moon Young, before he left, took the handkerchief out of his hand and wrapped his bleeding palm herself, with a precision that surprised him. In this world, she told him quietly, almost like she was sharing a secret, there are people who deserve to die. Some thoughtful freaks kill them in secret, so the rest of us can sleep peacefully at night, completely unaware. Which one do you think I am? He told her she was a clueless one, and she laughed, and the laugh sounded almost real. That night, Moon Young lay in her hotel bed thinking about how pretty his eyes were. Kang Tai sat at home thinking about hers. He picked up one of her books from the small shelf in his room, The Boy Who Fed on Nightmares, and read it slowly, all the way to the end. The story was about a boy who begged a witch to take all his bad memories away, and woke up years later, wondering why he still wasn't happy. The witch told him, in the final pages, that only those with painful memories could become strong, passionate, and emotionally flexible. Only those people, she said, could ever truly find happiness. Kang Tae closed the book. Somewhere in his sleeping brother's room, Sang Tae was having his recurring nightmare again. The dream about butterflies. The dream that always meant it was time to move. Kang Tae sighed. It was almost spring. The next morning, against his better judgment, he went to Moon Young's publishing house. He told himself he was there because his brother needed an autograph. He told himself it had nothing to do with her. But when she walked into the conference room and saw him, she stopped and she smiled, and he stepped close to her and asked her something he had never planned to ask aloud, whether she'd been afraid of the woman whose eyes hers reminded him of. He had known a girl once, a girl who saved him from drowning, a girl whose eyes had no warmth in them. Were you scared of her? Moon Young asked. No, Kang Tae said. I liked her. And in a flashback, on the balcony of a mansion in the woods, a small girl looked down at a boy holding a bouquet of flowers and smiled. She let him think for a while that she didn't recognize him. She watched him circle the truth like a man approaching a thing he wasn't sure he wanted to find. He told her that her eyes reminded him of someone he used to know, and she touched his chest lightly and said that bad memories tended to stay in the heart longer than good ones. He pushed her hand away. He asked her boss not to contact him again. And then, of course, her boss walked into the room. The boss was a man named Lee Sang-in, frantic, sweet-natured, perpetually one phone call away from a stress headache. He had built his career around Moon Young, and he had spent that career in a state of low-grade panic, because Moon Young was a force of nature, and Sang-in was a man who simply liked things to go smoothly. He pressed cash on Kang Tae. Kang Tae refused. Moon Young, watching all of this from the balcony like a queen surveying her court, said quietly to herself that she wanted him. She had her art director, a young woman named Seung Jae, dig up everything she could find about Kang Tae. His name, his address, his brother, the town he had grown up in. That town was Seongjin, a coastal city Kang Tae had spent most of his adult life avoiding. It was where his mother had been killed when he was a child. It was where his older brother Sang Tae had witnessed the murder, and had been unable for decades to describe the killer in any way other than to whisper over and over again, "The butterfly did it." It was where Kang Tae had learned to be afraid of spring, because every spring Sang Tae would dream of butterflies and scream that they were coming back to kill him, and every spring the brothers would pack up whatever home they had managed to build and run somewhere new. It was also where a young nurse named Nam Ju-ri lived. Ju-ri had grown up alongside Kang Tae and his best friend Jae-soo, and she had been quietly in love with Kangtae for as long as anyone in the neighbourhood could remember. She worked at the OK Psychiatric Hospital, which happened to employ Korea's leading expert in post-traumatic stress disorder. Sang-tae had post-traumatic stress disorder. Kang-tae, looking up the hospital's website that night, sat very still for a long time. Meanwhile, Moon-young's book signing was being set up at a downtown bookstore. Kang-tae had agreed, reluctantly, to bring Sang-tae. Sang-tae had been a fan of Moon-young's books for years, and the chance to get her signature in person had reduced him almost to tears. They walked through the city together, and the world brightened in the way the world always brightened when Sang-tae was happy. And Kang-tae watched him and smiled, because Sang-tae's joy was the only thing in his life that had ever felt uncomplicated. The signing went badly. While Kang-tae stepped outside to take a phone call, Sang-tae spotted a small child wearing a dinosaur costume and approached the family in the bright, unguarded way that he approached anything he loved. The child's father misunderstood. He shoved Sang-tae. He grabbed him by the hair. Sang-tae's hair was a sensory trigger, and Sang-tae fell into a panic, and the entire bookstore turned around to watch. Kang-tae came running. He pulled off his jacket and wrapped his brother in it, the way he had done 1,000 times before in 1,000 different cities, and he held him, and he apologized, and he didn't look at the strangers taking pictures with their phones. Moon-young, watching all of it from the signing table, tapped her pen slowly against the wood and silently asked herself the question she had asked once before, a long time ago, at the edge of a frozen lake. Help him, or don't help him. She helped. She came down off her platform, marched across the bookstore, grabbed the offending father by the hair, and asked him calmly how it felt. She told the mother, when the mother began to argue, that she was a crazy bitch. The cameras went wild. Sang-tae's screams quieted in the storage room as he wrapped his arms around himself in the butterfly hug Kang-tae had taught him years ago, and Kang-tae sat just outside the door and tried not to let Moon-young see how shaken he was. She provoked him anyway. She always would. She mimicked Sang-tae's cries to see if she could make him angry, and when he stood up to face her, she snatched the hat off his head and told him not to wear it, because she couldn't see his pretty face when he did. The moment was broken by a man in an ascot, a book critic with a thin smile and a thinner soul, who had for years been waiting for the right opportunity to humiliate Moon-young. He reminded her, in front of Kang-tae, that her successful parents had ended badly. Her father lost in dementia. Her mother dead, or as good as. He warned Kang-tae that anyone who got involved with her would not come out clean. And then he left. And Moon-young followed him into the stairwell. Kang-tae chased her. He grabbed her wrist. He told her not to do it. She turned to him with something almost desperate in her eyes and asked whether he liked her, whether he could really handle her. And then she pulled away and went after the critic anyway. And by the time Kang-tae arrived at the top of the stairs, the critic was tumbling down them. He survived. He shrieked about lawsuits all the way into the ambulance. Moon-young, grim, said it would have been better if he had simply died. Kang-tae took her by the shoulders and tried to teach her the butterfly hug. "Cross your arms," he said. "Pat your shoulders. Take a deep breath." He called it a technique used to calm trauma. She laughed at him and told him she didn't believe in any of that. She told him she wanted him to be her safety pin. She wanted him to keep her from exploding. He refused. He told her firmly, the way he told fully recovered patients, that they should not see each other again. The elevator doors opened. He stepped inside, and as the doors began to close, she said the only word that could have made him remember the day at the lake, the day she had torn the butterfly apart in front of him and watched him run. Coward. He went home to his brother that evening with the autograph still unsigned in his pocket. He went to bed earlier than usual, and in the morning, almost out of habit, almost without thinking about it, he started to pack. But this time, before he chose another anonymous town to disappear into, he asked Sang-tae a question he had never quite asked before. He asked his brother whether they should go back to Seongjin instead, whether they should, after all these years, finally go home. And Sang-tae, to his complete surprise, said yes. Moon Young, in her own apartment, woke to a text from Seung-jae listing everything she had asked for. Kang-tae's hometown, his workplace, his entire mapped life. She smiled. She got into her car. She drove 3 hours to a hospital where, just that morning, a quiet new caregiver had begun his first shift alongside a very flustered young nurse named Nam Ju-ri. When Moon Young walked into the OK psychiatric hospital wearing her killer red heels, the lights flickered overhead. She found Kang-tae standing at the end of a long hallway, and she smiled at him as if she had been searching for him her whole life. "Why are you here?" he asked. "Why do you think?" she said. "I came because I missed you." She had come, of course, because she was who she was, a woman who, when she saw something she wanted, rearranged her entire life around having it. She told him so, plainly, standing outside the hospital with the wind moving in her hair. She wanted him the way other people wanted shoes or coats or beautiful objects. She would, she said, pay for him, steal him, or take him by force. Kang-tae did not flinch. He had spent his life around people whose minds frightened other people. What unsettled him about Moon Young was not the strangeness of her words, but the fact that she meant them, and the fact that some part of him, some buried, unexamined part, was warming to the attention. She had not, in fact, come only for him. Her father, Go De-hwan, was a long-term patient at the hospital. He had severe dementia. He had a brain tumour that complicated everything. And he had, the staff would later realise, a particular and panicked terror of his own daughter. The hospital director, a wry, thoughtful man named Oh Ji-wang, hoped to convince Moon Young to teach a literature class for his patients. He hoped she might be persuaded to walk her father in the gardens. He was, like most people in Moon Young's life, optimistic about her in a way that was not quite supported by the available evidence. She agreed to the class. She did not agree to the walk. When she crossed paths with her father in the hallway and he cried out in fear at the sight of her, she walked past him without slowing. Her real interest was in the caregiver who had nearly died for her in a backstage corridor. She tracked Kang-tae down in the locker room mid-shift. She lingered by his car after work. She told him, in front of Ju-ri, that she had decided destiny was too cliché a word to describe what was happening between them. And Ju-ri stood very still in the hallway and watched the man she had loved for years exchange that particular kind of glance with the woman Ju-ri had once, briefly, been afraid of in elementary school. Kang-tae's life filled up quickly. Sang-tae was given a project at the hospital, a long blank wall by the stairwell that Director Oh wanted him to paint into a mural of the surrounding view. Sang-tae loved the assignment, on the condition he be paid for it, which was very Sang-tae. Ju-ri's mother, a warm motherly cook who had quietly decided some time ago that Kang-tae was going to be her son-in-law, whether her daughter cooperated or not, fed everyone. The brother settled into a rented apartment in Juri's mother's building, a few floors away from Juri herself. For the first time in 18 moves and a lifetime of running, the boys had something that almost resembled a home. And then a new patient arrived, and the careful equilibrium of the hospital began very gently to crack. The patient was Kwon Gi-do, the bipolar son of an assemblyman, a young man with a wide grin and a wild streak who came to the OK every spring during his manic episodes. He was loud, charming, and spectacularly unself-conscious. He had been admitted this time for spending 20 million won at a nightclub and running naked into traffic. He was the kind of patient the staff loved and worried about in equal measure. He was also, the moment he set eyes on Moon Young, the perfect accomplice for her growing boredom. She found him in the parking lot, took one look at his manic energy, and offered him a ride. He took it. She drove him out of the gates with the sunroof open, his arms in the air, the wind in her hair, and a fixed expression of mischief on her face. By the time Kang Tai and Juri intercepted them on the road, they had thoroughly absconded. What followed was almost a chase scene, and almost a comedy, and almost a tragedy. Moon Young aimed the car at Kang Tai standing in the middle of the road and stopped only inches away from him. He didn't flinch. She seemed almost disappointed. They tore through town, drew the police, and finally stopped, by Moon Young's design, or by chance the show didn't quite say, in the middle of Assemblyman Kwon's outdoor election campaign. Gi-do leaped out of the car and ran for the stage. He grabbed the microphone. He told the gathered crowd in front of cameras and journalists that he was the assemblyman's youngest son, and that he was the mentally ill one in the family, and that he just wanted, finally, to be seen. "I was the only stupid one in my family," he said, his voice cracking. "That isn't my fault. I was just born this way. He hit me because I didn't get good grades. He looked down on me because I couldn't understand things. He locked me up when I caused trouble. I just wanted his attention." He laughed through his tears and shouted that he had finally gone crazy for real. And as his father's men stormed the stage, Kang Tae stood in the crowd and saw, for a single bright second, himself in Gi-do's place, running and screaming and unafraid of being seen. He didn't know he was thinking it out loud. He didn't know Moon Young was standing right next to him. But he was, and she was, and she heard him say, very quietly, that maybe he should give in and have fun with her. She turned, slowly. She looked at him, and she smiled. He pretended he hadn't said it. He always did. The moment after he wanted something was the moment he closed it back up again, and he closed this one quickly, and turned and walked away, and pretended he'd only been talking to himself. Moon Young followed him to the curb. She told him, with surprising gentleness, that when he was ready to run away she would run with him. He didn't answer. He didn't say no either. Gi-do's mother had appeared by then to slap her son for embarrassing the family. Gi-do, bleeding from the lip and grinning in a way that was no longer entirely a grin, had told Kang Tae something he didn't think Kang Tae had ever heard before. "You can tell when someone hits you with affection," he said. "For some reason it doesn't make you upset." It triggered, in Kang Tae, a memory he had been holding carefully in the back of his mind for as long as he had been alive. His mother. Her hand on his face, sharp and quick. Not in tenderness, but in punishment. Because Sang Tai had been hurt while Kang Tae was off doing something for himself. He remembered, on the anniversary of his father's death, overhearing her drink alone at the kitchen table and tell the empty room that she would only allow herself to die after she had watched Sang Tai live a full life. She had not noticed Kang Tae listening from the doorway. When he had finally moved, she had pulled him into a hug, and she had rocked him back and forth like a much smaller child, and she had said the thing he would carry for the next 2 decades. Protect Sang Tae until the day he dies. That's why I gave birth to you. He had been a child. He had not yet learned how to take a sentence like that and put it down somewhere safe. And so he had not put it down. He had carried it. Moon Young, sitting beside him in the car as they drove back to the hospital, asked about his parents. He told her, evenly, that they were dead. She told him that to her, people were like things. Children abandoned old parents, and parents abandoned dumb children, the way Guido's father had abandoned Guido. He told her to stop the car. She kept driving. He grabbed the wheel and forced her to pull over. He got out. He told her that for a moment, briefly. He'd forgotten she was different. And he was sorry he had forgotten, because the disappointment hurt more this way. He walked. She followed him, calling after him. I love you, she said, and when he didn't stop, she said it again, louder, 3 more times, and he kept walking. The story tilted that day. Moon Young went home to the cursed castle alone and lay in bed while her dead mother's voice, a hallucination, a memory. The show was content to leave it ambiguous, brushed her hair the way her mother had once brushed it. You're my greatest creation, the voice said. My other self. And the memory bled into another, of a small Moon Young standing in front of a locked door with blood seeping out from underneath it, and her mother on the other side, dead. Meanwhile, at the hospital, a new shift began for Kang Tae, and a kindly older patient named Yunja pulled him aside to confide in him. She was a woman of about 60, fragile and bright-eyed, and she believed she had a wealthy daughter who would soon come pick her up. She did not. Her daughter had died in a car accident years before, and Unja's hallucinations were the only way her mind had found to hold on to the girl. She approached Moon Young in the garden one morning and called her daughter. She asked Moon Young if she didn't recognize her own mother. Moon Young froze. For one brittle, terrible second, she believed it. She believed her mother had come back. And then she understood that this was a stranger, a confused and grief-stricken stranger, and the wave of relief that broke over her was indistinguishable from rage. Later, when Unja approached her again, speaking now of being her mother, looking after her, taking care of that nurse who was trying to seduce her man, Moon Young could not hold it. She pleaded for the woman to please stop saying the word mom. She told Unja, in graphic and unsparing detail, exactly what her real mother's death had looked like. Unja collapsed. The memory of her own daughter's death broke through, and Moon Young walked past her without looking, while a single tear slid down her face. That night, Moon Young did not get out of bed. The dream came again. The mother brushing her hair, asking her why she'd brought him here, screaming. The ghost in the room, the hand on her throat, and in the rain, on a long stretch of empty road. Moon Young walked home barefoot in heels. Kang Tae, who had told her hours before that she would never understand him until the day she died, found out from Jae-soo what had happened in the garden. He thought of the way she had looked walking past his bus window alone. He thought of Unja's grief. He thought, finally, of the last lines of the book she had told him to read, Zombie Kid, about a boy who devoured his mother piece by piece because he was hungry, and only at the very end realised he had not been hungry for food. He had been hungry for warmth. He found her in the rain. He pulled off his jacket. He wrapped it around her. She fell into him and told him she was starving, and after a long moment, he held her back. He took her to a roadside motel, intending to leave her there, and the front desk clerk, clearly a man with a robust imagination, assumed they were checking in together and asked if they wanted any add-ons. The vibrating bed was specifically mentioned. Kang Tae went the kind of red that begins at the neck and cannot be hidden. Moon Young, of course, was delighted. He could not pay for the room. He had run out of the apartment without his wallet, and so the only place left to take her was home. She walked into his small rented apartment, looked at his neat, modest life, and decided immediately that she was staying the night. He decided immediately that she was not. He failed. What he gave her instead was a strange and important little gift. Sang Tai's emotion cards. Photographs of faces, each labelled with the feeling it represented. Try, he said. Memorize them. Make an effort. He told her she wasn't a zombie kid. He used her own hand to lift his hand to her cheek and quoted her own book back to her. This is what the boy really wanted. He didn't just want to be fed. She pulled away. She told him he was reading too much into it. But after he left to handle Sang Tae downstairs, she touched her cheek and asked the empty room who, exactly, was pitying whom. That night, Kang Tae told her things he had told no one else in the world. He told her, with his back turned to her in the dark, that his older brother had spent his whole life reading him for clues, that Sang Tae could see, almost instantly, when Kang Tae was unhappy, and that the only thing in the world Kang Tae cared about was making sure Sang Tae did not see it. He told her that he could fake a smile so well that Sang Tae would believe it every single time. He told her, very quietly, that he didn't care if it was fake, as long as Sang Tae was happy. She asked him, after a long pause, about the girl he had liked when he was a child. Did he miss her? He said he wanted to forget her. Not because she was a bad person, though Moon Young, smiling in the dark, suggested it, but because he had been the one who ran away. He had been the coward. He had been the one ashamed all this time, all these years, of his own small failure of nerve. Moon Young listened. She did not tease him for once. After a long silence, she said, simply, that he had run toward her this time. Not away. Down at the hospital, in a quiet ward, Go De Huan turned in his sleep as a strange shape glided down the hallway. The window of his room frosted over. A figure pressed a gloved hand against his throat. He cried out, his roommates woke, and the figure was gone before anyone could see it. The OK hospital had a ghost. Several patients had been hearing it humming for weeks. Most of the staff dismissed the sightings. One nurse, a sharp-eyed older woman named Nurse Park, listened in a way that could not yet be read. In the morning, an awkward confrontation unfolded on the rooftop between Juri and Moon Young, complete with hair-pulling and unkind words about elementary school history. Moon Young told Juri that Kang Tae had always belonged to her. Juri told Moon Young she would tire of him and discard him, the way she always discarded everything. Kang Tae broke up the fight, shoved taxi money into Moon Young's hands, and told her not to come back. She threw the money on the ground. He was not himself. He drank too much that night with Jae-soo. He told his oldest friend that he was forgetting things, the scars, the butterflies, even his brother. He needed Jae-soo to remind him, sometimes, who he was supposed to be. What he did not yet know was that Moon Young had just made a decision, and she had a contract drawn up. She gave it to Sang Tae the next day at the hospital, and told him that if he signed it, he could come live in her castle as her live-in illustrator He signed it, gleefully, because it was a contract that promised him a camping car instead of money, because his little brother hated to move, and a camping car would mean they would never have to. Sangtae was vibrating with excitement when Kangdae arrived at the castle to find him. Moon Young met Kangdae on the balcony with an expression somewhere between amusement and triumph. He had told her the day before that he had finally figured out who she was. He had been the boy at the lake. He had been the boy with the flowers. He had run, and he was sorry, and he wanted to put the memory down properly so he could leave. She'd made it impossible for him to leave. Sangtae had signed the contract. Sangtae did not want to leave. And when Kangtae tried to tear the contract in half, Sangtae knocked him to the ground and beat him with his fists and screamed something at him that Kangtae had screamed at his mother once a long time ago. "I'm not yours. I belong to myself." Kangtae lay on the gravel and did not get up. Moon Young stood over him, arms crossed, and told him his brother had abandoned him. "Now," she said, "it's your turn to choose. Will you also abandon him? Or will you let him lock you down for the rest of your life?" He walked home. He cried alone in his apartment over the torn contract Sangtae had written in his shaky, careful handwriting, the one that said his payment should be a camping car, because his little brother hated to move. And the next morning, after a long night of thinking, Kangtae packed his bag. He moved into the castle. He moved in with conditions. Sangtae would live there during the week and return to the apartment on weekends. Kangtae would take Sangtae home immediately if Sangtae ever wanted to leave. And Moon Young, the woman who had told him just yesterday that promises meant nothing, had to respect his brother. She agreed without hesitation. "How can I trust you?" he asked. "I'll keep it," she said, "because it's a promise I made to you." The castle was enormous and dust-thick and had not been properly cleaned in 20 years. The brothers got to work. Moon Young, who had lived alone in this house for as long as the house had been hers, watched them sweep and scrub and unpack groceries, and she watched Kangtae set the table for dinner, and the expression on her face was unfamiliar even to her. She was not used to people moving toward her instead of away. She asked for extra rice. He smiled. He gave it to her. That same night, while Sangtae explored the unfamiliar halls looking for the bathroom, the door to the basement creaked open beneath him. He started down the steps. A hand caught him. Moon Young pulled him back. "Do you know the story of Bluebeard?" she asked. Sangtae did not. So she told him about a count with a blue beard who lived alone in a castle, whom no one would marry because he was so different. About the woman who finally agreed. About the one room in the house she was forbidden to enter. About what the woman found inside it. "The corpses of his previous wives," Moon Young said. And then, in a flashback no one in the room could see, we watched a younger Moon Young unlock that same basement door and find inside it the body of her own mother. When Sangtae told the story to Kangtae later, in the safety of their shared bedroom, he asked his brother why everyone had been afraid of Bluebeard. Kangtae said that Bluebeard had been different. "Is being different something to be afraid of?" Sangtae asked. Kangtae told him no. He told him Bluebeard would, one day, find someone who was not afraid of him. Someone who would tell him it was all right to be different. Outside the door, where neither brother could see her, Moon Young smiled. The next day at the hospital was when the story made its first real, lethal move. Yun-Ja, the patient who had mistaken Moon Young for her dead daughter, encountered Moon Young again in the hallway. This time she had been confused into believing Moon-young was her mother. She kept saying, "It's me, your mum," and the word landed in Moon-young like a stone dropping down a well. She begged Yunja to stop. Yunja did not stop. And finally Moon-young described in graphic and unsparing detail the exact way her real mother's body had been found. Yunja collapsed. The memory of her real daughter's death surfaced. Moon-young stepped over her and walked away. Kang-tae, watching from a few feet off, saw something on her face he had not seen before. Not cruelty. Fear. Genuine, unguarded fear. Director O, watching from a window far above, pieced something together for the first time. What if Moon-young doesn't miss her mother, Kang-tae would tell him days later. What if she's afraid of her? That night, Moon-young descended into the basement again. There was a portrait of her mother on the wall, a vanity in the corner, a stain on the floor. She remembered her mother brushing her hair as a child. She remembered being told again and again that she was special. "You're my greatest creation," her mother had whispered. "My other self." And then, in the dream that came when Moon-young finally fell asleep, the mother appeared above her bed and threatened to kill her precious prince. The prince who, downstairs, was already running up the steps because he had heard her crying. Kang-tae found her caught in the paralysis between sleep and waking, screaming for him to leave. "Get out," she sobbed, her eyes barely open. "Run!" Her hands gripped his shirt with a desperation that contradicted every word she was saying. He listened to her hands instead of her words. He held her. He told her, very gently, that he wasn't going anywhere. And as her crying slowly eased into shallow, even breathing, he took her other hand in his, and he stayed. That was the night the story first allowed itself to wonder out loud whether something inside Moon-young, something that had been frozen and locked away her whole life, might be capable of thawing. Whether the woman who had been told her whole life that she was a monster might, with great care and great patience, be allowed to become something else. What no one in the castle yet knew was that Moon-young's mother, the woman whose body had vanished from a locked basement 2 decades ago, whose death had been registered without a corpse, whose face had been carefully torn from every family photograph, was already much closer than they realised. The fever broke at dawn. Kang-tae had stayed with her all night, dabbing her forehead with a damp towel, and when she opened her eyes she was looking up at him already, and for a moment neither of them spoke. He got up to fetch medicine, greater than she stopped him. She wanted him to know that she had done nothing wrong the day before, that the patient had insisted, and she'd only corrected her. He nodded. He said, "Okay, I got it." And he meant it. The hospital, however, was less forgiving. Director O suspended Moon-young's literature classes, and the gossip about her conduct made its way through the staff with the inevitability of bad weather. She did not stay in bed to mourn this. She announced she was sick. She held a thermometer to her forehead with a hairdryer until it climbed. She invented reasons for him to come back to her. He saw through every one of them, and he felt for the first time in a long time the small, embarrassed thrill of being wanted by someone who simply could not pretend not to want him. Somewhere in the middle of all of this, he went to her one evening with something very small in his hands. It was a doll, a little stitched-together creature he had made years ago for Sang-tae when Sang-tae's nightmares about butterflies had been at their worst. He called the doll Mang-tae, a kind of homemade dream catcher. He told her, awkwardly, that he hoped it might help her sleep. She thought, when she saw him reach toward her, that he was about to kiss her. She closed her eyes. She puckered her lips. He flicked her on the forehead and pressed the doll into her hand, and she opened her eyes and looked at him, and she did not know yet what to do with the feeling that came up in her then. She slept that night holding the doll. The next morning, in a moment Kang Tae himself would not remember consciously for many more days, his mother spoke to him in his dreams. She had told him, the night he held her too tightly as a small boy, that he was her adorable son, that she was sorry. He had been asleep. He had not heard, but the memory was inside him somewhere, and at the strangest possible moment lying next to his sleeping brother, it surfaced, and Kang Tae cried into his brother's shoulder and said, "I miss Mom." Sang Tae, half asleep and a little hungry, mumbled that he wanted jambong too. The story called this episode The Cheerful Dog. The book by that name was about a dog tied to a tree who learned to wag his tail and act sweet, because that was what was expected of him. The dog dreamed every night of cutting his leash and running away into the open field. But the dog had been tied up so long that he had forgotten how to free himself. Sang Tae had been carrying that book around for weeks. Moon Young recognised when Kang Tae brought it up that the cheerful dog was her and that it was him. When Yunja was finally ready to face what she had done, she told Kang Tae the story of the day her daughter had bought her an expensive shawl. Yunja had been horrified at the price. They had argued. Yunja's last words to her real daughter had been, "I don't need an immature daughter like you." Her daughter had run into traffic. The car had not stopped. "If I had known she would die," Yunja said, weeping, "I never would have said it." Kang Tae listened. He thought of his own mother, drunk on the anniversary of his father's death, telling him she had only given birth to him so that he could care for his brother. He thought of what he wished, even now, his mother had said to him instead. At the end of that long week, Moon Young met Yunja in the garden and did not apologise exactly. Apology was not yet within her vocabulary, but accepted Yunja's apology for her, and accepted the woman's shawl, and walked away wearing it. Yunja told Kang Tae, watching her go, that her burden was finally gone. That same night, Moon Young came home and met her father in the hospital corridor for what would prove to be one of the last times. He looked at her with strange clarity. "You will end up like your mother," he said. "You won't be able to escape." "No," Moon Young said. "I'm different." She went home that evening with something hardening inside her. She took up a pair of scissors and, in front of her mother's old mirrors, began chopping off her long, careful hair in the uneven, unsteady fistfuls. When Kang Tae came home and saw her, she greeted him with a delighted lopsided bob and the tearful, almost giddy announcement that she had finally cut off her leash. She was, she said, like the cheerful dog, free at last. He laughed, in spite of himself. He sat her down and tidied up the worst of the damage as best he could. She turned to him after a long quiet and asked almost shyly if she looked pretty. And he said yes, and he meant it. And she could hear that he meant it, and she smiled at him, and her eyes filled with tears, and for once, she did not look away. Sang Tae preferred her with long hair. He told her so over breakfast. She sulked. Kang Tae tried to mediate. The morning ended with her demanding he scoop the food onto a spoon for her, which had, somewhere along the way, become a thing they did. The lightness didn't last. The hospital that morning was investigating a strange incident from the previous night. Someone, a long-haired figure, on the security cameras, had walked the halls humming the same lullaby Go De-hwan's wife had once sung to their daughter. The tune was, "Oh My Darling Clementine." Day Juan had had a seizure shortly after the figure passed his door. Director O, watching the footage, paused on a frame and frowned. He thought the figure looked like a patient named Park Okran, a woman who, several days earlier, had publicly humiliated Ju-ri and dismissed another patient's ghost sightings. Director O interviewed Okran. She was unbothered. She mocked him for paying her any attention. He let her go. Privately, he asked Kang Tae to keep an eye on her. Meanwhile, two patients, a young man named Jung Tai and a young woman named Yum, were discovered by Kang Tae having a quiet, forbidden romance in a supply closet. He did not want to report them. The hospital did not allow patient relationships, and one of them would have to be transferred. He told them quietly that the only thing they could do was get well and meet again outside. He was thinking about them. He was thinking about Moon Young. And later that day, when he and Moon Young accidentally encountered a well-dressed male fan of hers at a coffee shop, and when she handed the fan her phone number while playfully calling Kang Tae just some guy I know, something in him snapped quietly, the way an overstrung wire snaps. He clenched his jaw all the way through having to take a photograph of her with the fan. He left in a temper. He stalked out to the parking lot, and only later, when she caught up with him, did she reveal that she had been talking the whole time about a pen, a fountain pen she had stolen from the man's pocket, because in Korean fan and pen sound nearly identical. "Ah, so cool," she told the pen, smirking. He laughed in spite of himself. He was beginning to realize in a great deal of trouble. That same evening, while he was at the hospital, Moon Young and Sang Tae fought over the doll Mang Tae and accidentally tore its head off. Kang Tae came home to a small civil war, mediated it, sewed the doll back together, and was rewarded with Moon Young falling asleep in his lap in the living room. He covered her with a blanket. He tucked the freshly stitched doll into her hand. He sat for a long time and watched her sleep, and he allowed himself, briefly and lightly, to lay his hand on hers, and then drew it back, because he was not yet ready to accept what was happening to him. The next day, RM's abusive ex-husband appeared in the hospital garden. He chased her down. He demanded she take him back. When RM told him there was someone else, his face changed, and he raised his hand to strike her, and an empty soda can hit him squarely in the face. "Sorry," Moon Young called, walking toward them. "I thought you were a trash can." He punched her instead. He got her to the ground. He was raising his hand again when Kang Tae arrived at a full run and hit him twice as hard, and then a third time, and would have kept hitting him if Cha Yong, another caregiver, hadn't held him back. The hospital staff stared. Sang Tae stared. Moon Young, on the ground, dropped the rock she'd been gripping behind her back as a weapon, and stared. None of them had ever seen Kang Tae lose his temper. He helped her up. He cupped her cheek. He asked if she was all right. The world around them seemed, for a moment, not to exist. He was suspended, of course, without pay. He packed up his locker slowly and walked out into the parking lot, expecting to feel ashamed, expecting some weight to drop down on him, and finding instead that he felt something close to weightless. He started smiling on the long walk back to the bench where Moon Young was waiting for him. By the time he reached her, he was almost laughing out loud. He told her he had been suspended, that he might be sued, that everything was an absolute mess. "Take me on that trip," he said, holding out his hand. "The one you promised, where we run away together." She took his hand. She matched his grin. For the first time in his entire life, the boy who had spent 2 decades running away from things ran towards something instead. He didn't know yet how short the trip would be, or what it would cost him in the end. He only knew, in that moment, that he was finally going. In the car, almost as soon as the doors closed, his courage faltered. He looked at her, suddenly aware of the enormity of what he was doing, and almost laughed. She threatened to drive them off the pier if he didn't commit. He committed. They went. She wanted to take him somewhere extravagant. She suggested the Serengeti. She was scandalized to learn he didn't have a passport. "Did you come from the stars?" she asked. They settled, in the end, for a quiet overnight trip into the mountains. There was one stop they had to make first. He insisted on bringing Sang-tae. She refused. They argued. She nearly drove them into a guardrail. She ordered him out of the car and left him on a stretch of empty road, and he watched her go, and he smiled. He went home. He called his oldest friend. Time equals, quote, 0.8 seconds, quote / greater than he told Jae-soo, simply that he wanted to start having fun. He asked Jae-soo to look after Sang-tae for a day. The trip, when it finally happened, was the most ordinary thing 2 people had ever done, and the most extraordinary thing 2 people had ever done. They drove. They walked across a long suspension bridge that gave Moon-young vertigo. He laughed. She insisted on taking selfies. He smiled the kind of smile that is not for the camera. That night, in the small lodge they had reserved, an unexpected complication arrived. Jung-tae and Ah-reum, the patient couple from the hospital, who had, it turned out, used Director Oh's friend Pil-wong's day out as cover to escape, were already there. Jung-tae begged Kang-tae to pay for their room. Moon-young, smiling, paid for both rooms herself. His rationality can never win against his desires, she told Kang-tae. It's his duty as a caregiver to look after them. And so they stayed. They drank. The drinks turned out to be much stronger than they looked. Kang-tae, whose tolerance was apparently the most fragile thing about him, tipped over backward laughing. Moon-young pinned him to the bed and tried to kiss him. He rolled them both into the sheets, held her by the wrists, and told her firmly to go to sleep. She mumbled that she would sleep faster if he stroked her hair. He stroked her hair until she was breathing slowly and evenly. Then he sat across the room from her in the dark, and he looked at her, and he said softly that he could not run away anymore. In the morning, he met her outside with his hands behind his back. He was holding a small bouquet of flowers. He told her he wanted to give her what he had not given her years ago. She smiled. He told her she was pretty. She smiled wider. And then, before either of them was quite ready, he leaned in and kissed her, and the boy in his memory, the one who had run away from her at the edge of a frozen lake, was finally allowed to walk back into the picture and hand her his flowers. Jung-tae, that morning, did not run away. He had decided in the night that he was not yet ready. He had let Ah-reum go on without him. He cried in the back seat of Moon-young's car all the way back to the hospital. Moon-young told him, with feeling, that he had been an idiot. Kang-tae told her that he had let her go because he loved her. Moon-young told Kang-tae that she would never let him go, and Kang-tae, in the only line of dialogue in the entire episode that the story would later make us regret, told her that none of them ever knew what would happen. He went into the hospital to check on Sang-tae. He got there too late. A caregiver named Cha-yong, gossiping in the bathroom, had been overheard by Sang-tae. The gossip had been wrong and inflated, and dressed up in language that twisted what had actually happened, that Kang Tae and Moon Young had been on a trip together, and that they were getting married. Sang Tae had heard it. Sang Tae had been holding his sketchbook, in which he had drawn his brother, for the first time smiling in his sleep, the smile of a man who was happy. He had wanted to ask his brother whether he liked Moon Young. He had wanted, perhaps, even to be asked to come along. Instead, in front of the entire hospital, Sang Tae stood at the top of the staircase and threw water at his brother, and screamed at him for lying, and screamed the words from the worst day of both their lives. "I wish Hyung would just die. You said that." He told everyone within earshot in a voice raw and breaking that his brother had wanted him dead. He told them about the river and about the day his brother had run away when he had fallen through the ice. "He's trying to kill me," he sobbed, again and again. "He's trying to kill me." Kang Tae fell to his knees in the middle of the lounge. Moon Young, watching from the doorway, shed a single quiet tear. The whole brittle, beautiful structure of the past few weeks, the tentative moving in, the nightmare doll, the kiss in the morning, the small bouquet of flowers, collapsed in a single corridor full of staring strangers. And Kang Tae could only kneel there on the floor and cry, and tell his brother, and tell himself, that what Sang Tae was saying was not true. Sang Tae was sedated and put to bed in the isolation room. Kang Tae sat outside the door for the rest of the night and did not move. Moon Young found him the next afternoon and threw a shoe at his back to make him look at her. She tried to tell him that he'd done nothing wrong at the river, that in the end he had jumped in, that he had saved Sang Tae. She tried to tell him that what mattered was that he had come back. He looked at her with his eyes full of an exhaustion she had never seen before, and he said the thing that broke her. "I ran because I really wanted him to die," he said. "He knows that. And so do you." She had nothing to say to that. He told her that if she had not pulled him out of that lake when they were children, he would never have had to live this way. He cried once. He turned and he walked away. The hospital, in the days that followed, ran on rumours. Directoro sat down with Kang Tae and tried to tell him, gently, that he and his brother were running a three-legged race, that as long as one of them stayed standing when the other one fell, neither of them would ever fall down. He told him to go back to work. He told him that one day, perhaps, Sang Tae might be the one who stayed standing when Kang Tae fell. He told him to confront the memory of the river head-on. Sang Tae was now refusing food, refusing visits, hiding under his blankets. Park Oak Ran, meanwhile, had been left a copy of one of Do Hui-jae's books in her room, with a note tucked inside that read, "The little brother kills his big brother." None of the staff saw who left it. Okran, when she found it, read the note and smiled. The pieces of a much larger plan had begun, very quietly, to assemble themselves. Moon Young could not reach Kang Tae. She tried, again and again. She spammed his phone with the messages, a fake fever, a threat to throw out Sang Tae's cartoon tapes, photographs of herself looking pitiful in an empty bedroom. He ignored every single one. When she finally cornered him outside the hospital, he led her down to the water, and there, in a voice flat as glass, he told her that they had been ill-fated from the very start. He told her she'd been a firecracker to him, a one-time event. He had had his fun, he said, and now he was finished. He asked her plainly to stay out of his life. She broke. Hands clenched at her chest, she screamed at his retreating back. "I'm not a firecracker. I'm a bomb. I don't disappear when I explode. I blow up and kill everyone." And he kept walking, because she could not see his eyes from where she stood, and she could not see how each step was hurting him. That night, he let himself quietly into the isolation room and sat by his sleeping brother's bedside. He took Sangtai's hand and pressed it to his cheek, and he wept for a long time, in silence, the way a person weeps when there is no one there to comfort them and no comfort that would help. The next afternoon, Juri's mother bought him lunch. She told him she hated him for breaking her daughter's heart, but that one should be kind to people one hated. She suggested he be born as her son in his next life. He told her he didn't want to be born again. She told him to eat. She loved him in the way she would have loved any battered, exhausted, motherless boy. And the love was uncomplicated, and he was crying when he said yes. Juri, that evening, did him a favour he had not earned. She drove to the castle and brought Moonyoung some of Sangtae's things. She drank wine with Moonyoung until she was slurring. She slapped Moonyoung upside the head and called her a bitch and laughed, and Moonyoung laughed back, because for both of them, this was as close to friendship as they had ever come. At home, in their apartment, Sangtae finally opened the door to the closet he was hiding in, and Kangtae apologised for everything. The river, the lie, the wish, the years of resentment, the mother they had shared so unequally. Sangtae held him while he cried. "Don't abandon me," Kangtae sobbed. Sangtae said the same thing back. They held each other for a long time. Long after Sangtae had fallen asleep that night, Kangtae lay awake looking at the photographs on his phone, pictures from the trip with Moonyoung. He looked at them for a long time, and he felt the longing in his chest like a second heartbeat, and he did not know yet how he was going to live with it. A long way away, Park Oak Ran walked through the gates of the OK Hospital and into the night, holding a small package in her hand. Cha Yong, the caregiver who had been with her, had been hit with a rock and left dazed. She had told him she had to meet someone, because it was an important day. Kangtae, hearing this, remembered Moonyoung's last text, that today was an important day to her. He understood suddenly exactly what kind of day it was. He ran for the hospital door. At the castle, Moonyoung uncrumpled a piece of paper Sangtae had thrown out his window earlier, the drawing of her and the brothers riding in a camping car. She held it. She wept. There was a knock at the door. She stood up slowly and went to answer it. Park Oak Ran stood on the threshold, popped a small party popper directly in Moonyoung's face, and sang the words "Happy Birthday" in a voice that was just slightly off. And every drop of warmth in Moonyoung's body went, all at once, very cold. Kangtae had finally pieced it together. The strange note cards in Oak Ran's drawer with their crossed out lines. The ghost humming through the halls. Oak Ran's age, Oak Ran's history of plastic surgery, Oak Ran's tendency to slip into and out of personas, and the simplest, most awful fact that the woman Moonyoung feared most in the world might not be dead at all. He drove. He called. Moonyoung did not answer. In the castle, Oak Ran wandered the halls admiring objects that had not been hers in 20 years. She picked up a fountain pen from the desk and called it pretty. Moonyoung told her to put it down. Oak Ran did not. "We're alike," she said, smiling. / greater than I also hate it when people touch my things. And she whipped the pen away and slashed Moonyoung's palm, and the cut was so clean and so unexpected that Moon Young did not register the pain at first, only the strangeness of it. She remembered Kang Tae's advice. Count to 3. Hold yourself together. She did. She told Okran to leave. She would, later. Wish she'd simply lashed out. When Kang Tae burst into the castle calling her name and saw the splatter of blood on the study floor, his heart fell straight through him. Then she appeared at the top of the stairs, hand bandaged, alive, and he closed the distance between them and held her so tightly she could not breathe. She thought, for one shining second, that he had come because he had missed her. He had come, in fact, because he had been afraid. He had come because Okran was missing. He had come for the same reason a caregiver always came. The disappointment in her face was its own small wound. She walked away from him. She went to her room. He followed her. He sat on the bed and tried to dress her hand. She told him her hand did not hurt. Your words from before, she told him. They hurt much, much more. He took her by the shoulders. He told her gently that if she felt herself losing control, she should count to 3, the way he had taught her once before. They counted together. 1, 2, and on 3, they meant to say 3. He gave up. He cupped her face in both his hands. He kissed her. It was in the long arithmetic of the show, the moment they finally allowed themselves to be on the same side. He pulled away after a moment to look at her. Then softly, almost reverently, he said, "Happy birthday. I missed you." He had a fever. She made him stay. She tended to him in bed and he pulled her down beside him on the pillow. And he closed his eyes, and he held her hand and looked at the scar on his palm, the scar from the day they had first met in a dressing room with a knife between them, and she curled against his side, and for the first time in either of their lives, neither of them was alone in the dark. The next morning, he sat her down and told her, finally, the thing he had been protecting himself from telling her for weeks. He told her that his mother had been murdered. He told her his brother had been the only witness. He told her about the butterfly Sangtai could not stop dreaming about, and the way the brothers had been running from spring every year of their lives. He told her, also, that he still wanted her in his life. He still needed her. He repeated something she had once said to him. When someone you need shows up, it's destiny. He looked up at her with tears in his eyes and asked her to stay by his side, while he stayed by his brothers. She smiled. She nodded. She would. At the hospital, Director O was beginning to have his own hard suspicions. Pil Wong had told him that Okran had been an obscure stage actress before she was committed, that she was always practicing her lines, even when no one had asked her to perform, that she had once memorized whole monologues from books her roommates had never seen her open. Nurse Park, calmly running the floor, ordered Okran's belongings cleared and her bed reassigned. Okran was a missing patient after all, then there was a waiting list. Kang Tae searched the cards. He could not make out the crossed-out lines. That afternoon, Moon Young went to see Sang Tae. She had decided to make a peace offering. She tried to lure him into illustrating a new book based on his drawing of the camping car. He refused. He told her she could not have his brother. He told her she was a stranger, and he was the brother, and Kang Tae was his. She came back to the hospital that evening with 12 pizzas as a peace offering and her frustration spilling out. Kang Tae found her in the lounge, knelt down in front of her, and told her something that surprised them both with how easy it was to say. "Sang Tae is not protecting Kang Tae from you," he said. "He's worried you'll take Kang Tae from him. We have to earn his trust together. You're not taking me away from him. You're someone else who will stay by his side." She softened. She agreed to try. Late that night, far from the hospital, a woman in a blonde wig pulled her car off the road and opened her hand. In her palm was a butterfly brooch, a strange mutant design with a small butterfly sitting atop a larger one, a brooch unlike any other in the world. She looked at it with something almost like fondness. Inside the silent castle, in a room Moon Young could not see, the brooch was now missing from the vanity drawer where it had sat for 20 years. Sang-in returned to the castle the next afternoon with terrible news. Moon Young's father's tumour had returned. He had been moved to the isolation ward. The doctors did not believe surgery would help. Sang-in did not know, when he told her, whether she would care. She did, in her own way, care. She did not visit her father. She lay in bed afterward and stared at an old photograph of him from her childhood, a photograph in which her mother's face had been carefully torn out years ago. There had been one good day with her father, a long time ago. He had read her a fairy tale once. He may have only done it once, she would say later that night, drinking with Juri, her voice cracking for the first time the show had ever shown. But I can never forget it. She told Juri the story of A Tale of Two Sisters, the Korean folk tale she had hated as a child. The story of the two girls abused by their stepmother while their father turned away. The one who neglects abuse, she said, is worse than the one who abuses. The two sisters were practically killed by their father. Across town, a different father, the long-absent father of a patient named Sun Ho, burst into Director Oh's office and demanded that his daughter donate part of her liver to him. Director Oh, for once in his life, raised his voice. He told the man he had no right to ask her for anything. He told him he had walked away from his daughter when she was a child, being beaten nearly to death by her mother. He told him to leave. Out in the garden, Kang Tae offered Sun-hai a choice. He would kick her father out if she wanted, or he would protect her while she said the things she had been waiting her whole life to say. "Protect me," Sun-hai said in a small voice. He stepped in front of her. She told her father, weeping, that she had always begged him for help and he had never come. That she hated him more for walking away than she hated her mother for the bruises. That she had still, even after he had left her with the shaman, waited for him. Her father walked past her without answering. Kang Tae turned and held Sun-hai. She regressed to her younger self in his arms. And inside the castle, Moon Young looked at the photograph of her father and slowly, began to soften. The next day, the hospital ran what was supposed to be an ordinary therapy hour. Moon Young taught a literature class about Beauty and the Beast. Belle was delusional, Moon Young told her students cheerfully. She fell into Stockholm Syndrome. R. Rayum, who had returned briefly to the hospital, burst into tears and said that wasn't true, that Belle had loved the Beast. That love had healed his wounded soul. And Moon Young, watching her, remembered Kang Tae holding her in the dark, and the word love repeated itself in her head like a sentence she'd never been allowed to learn. In the back of his quiet office, Director Oh, almost as a thought experiment, almost as an indulgence, looked through the patient interview notes and pulled out one in particular. Go De-hwan, in better days, had described his late wife. She was beautiful, he had said. She loved Moon Young too much. She had used to sing Moon Young to sleep with the song "Oh My Darling Clementine." The same song, the same humming, the same song that OK Hospital Ghost had been singing for weeks. That afternoon, Sang-tae did something brave. He told Director O, with his eyes closed, the memory he had carried for 2 decades. He told him about his mother dying in an alley. He told him about a woman with high heels and red lips standing over her body. He told him she had crouched beside him and stroked his hair and threatened to kill him if he ever said anything. He told him about her brooch, a baby butterfly sitting on top of a mother butterfly, a design unlike any he had ever seen anywhere else. Kang Tai sat across from his brother, and Director O sat across from both of them, and only Kang Tai knew that he had seen that exact brooch the night before in a torn family photograph on Moon Young's bedside table. He left the office. He walked the halls. He pressed his fist into a wall and held it there. He thought, with mounting horror, about every conversation he and Moon Young had ever had, about destiny, about happy endings. He could not tell her. He could not bear to tell her. That evening, when Moon Young excitedly proposed they take a family portrait the following day, her, him, and Sang Tae, like a proper family, he could not breathe. He told her to leave. He told her again. He shouted it. She walked out without another word. He found Director O in an empty classroom that night and broke. He told him that the killer of his mother might be Moon Young's mother. He told him that he had finally allowed himself to feel like a person, and now this. I wanted to tear that butterfly to shreds, he said, weeping, if I ever met it. But I can't even do that anymore. He came home in the small hours of the morning. He stood in Moon Young's doorway. She was asleep. He looked at the torn family photograph on her nightstand, and at the woman in it whose face had been ripped away, and a tear slid down his cheek. The next day, despite all of it, he put on the suit she had laid out for him. He walked into the photo studio just as the camera was about to fire. "I'm not too late, am I?" he asked, smiling softly. And Moon Young and Sang Tae lit up beside him, and for one held breath, the 3 of them stood together as a family, and the picture was taken. He had decided the night before that he would not be the one to take this away from her. Not yet. Not yet. He had decided as well what he would not do. He would not run. He would not leave. He would not let what he now knew turn the woman he loved back into the locked-up child she'd once been. The next morning he asked Moon Young whether she was a part of his family. She asked him hesitantly, almost shy, whether she could be. "Of course you are," he said. "We have a family portrait now. That's the proof." She smiled in a way she had perhaps never smiled before in her life. He smiled back. It was, as the show would later make us understand, the calm before everything fell. There was much that was sweet that day. Sang Tae had begun studying expressions in the apartment with Jae-soo as his unhappy model. Juri had begun, very tentatively, to soften towards Sang In, who had abandoned all pretense of professionalism and was now openly trying to win her heart. Pil Wong had been reading Sang Tae's copy of The Boy Who Fed on Nightmares and had been moved by it, and had told Sang Tae that perhaps he too could find his door someday and walk out of the prison of his own past. There was much that was harder. Sunhae had been confronted by her father one final time. Dae Hwan, fading, had finally told someone, Nurse Park, on a quiet evening holding her hand, that he had killed his wife. He had been a man with a brain tumour and a beautiful wife with a beautiful smile, and he had discovered that the beautiful wife had murdered the housekeeper. He had pushed her, in his horror. She had fallen. He had dragged the body into the basement. He had dumped it later, in a suitcase, into the river. And little Moon Young, he told the calm older nurse holding his hand, had seen all of it. She had been a small girl. She had seen everything. Nurse Park listened to him with great patience. Moon Young, that same evening, sat with Juri and finally told her about the one good day she had ever had with her father. The day he'd read her a fairy tale and called her his princess. He may have only done it once, she said, but I can never forget it. Daehuan died in the night. Moon Young and the brothers visited his memorial space in the rain. She did not cry. She told them she was not sad. Sang-Tai looked at her face for a long time, trying to read it, and she told him gently that she was fine. They turned to leave. She stopped and looked back and remembered the fairy tale and the hug, and she stood there in the rain and let herself feel both things at once. The man who had failed her and the father who had loved her in the only minute he had known how. That evening, Juri's mother told Kangtae something he needed to hear. She told him that the worst thing a child could do to a parent was give up on being happy because of the parent. If you want to make your mother happy, she said, do your best to live a happy life from now on. He smiled at that. He held it inside him. He came home with side dishes Moon Young liked. She had hung the family portrait in the study. She told him she wanted to sell the castle, a new publishing company, a new camping car, a new everything. He told her he had always wanted to wear a school uniform. She laughed at him and told him she would never let him near a school where there were other girls. She promised them all a happy ending. He believed her. The next morning, the three of them walked into the OK hospital together, in good spirits, ready to work. There was a crowd already gathered in the lounge. There were faces turned upward, all looking at something on the stairwell wall above them. Sang-Tai had been working on his mural for weeks. He had nearly finished it. Someone had painted a butterfly across it. A mutant butterfly. A baby butterfly resting atop a mother butterfly. The exact butterfly from Sang-Tae's nightmares. The exact brooch from a torn family photograph in the castle's basement. The exact insignia of the woman Moon Young had spent 20 years trying not to fear. Moon Young's eyes widened. Sang-Tae began to cry. Said this wasn't his butterfly. Said this was the one the woman who had killed his mother had been wearing on her coat. Kangtae could not move. He could only stand there and watch as Moon Young remembered, and remembered the right way, and turned and ran for the door. He caught up with her at the entrance. He held her by the shoulders. He could not find a single word to say. "Tell me it's not true," she sobbed. He could not. Far away, on a quiet stretch of road in the late afternoon light, a woman was driving with the windows down, humming "Oh My Darling Clementine" in a low, contented voice. Her nails were bright red. Her brooch, that strange mutant butterfly, was pinned to the collar of her jacket. Her name, on her hospital ID, was Nurse Park. For days, Moon Young did not eat. Kangtae sat outside her bedroom door long into the nights, his back against the wood, talking to her through the silence. He told her he'd been devastated when he had learned the truth too. He told her that none of this was her fault, that she had done nothing wrong, that he was not going anywhere. She did not answer, but she listened. The hospital had moved fast. Director O, having reviewed the footage of the figure painting the butterfly across Sang-Tae's mural, had identified Nurse Park immediately. He filed her resignation. He was preparing, when the time was right, to involve the police. He gave Kangtae as much time off as he needed to be with his family. What he did not yet know, what only the audience knew in the long, bone-cold flashbacks the show now allowed itself, was that Nurse Park had been Du Huijai the entire time. That she had been Moon Young's mother, the famous detective novelist, a woman who had not died in that locked basement 20 years ago, but had only fallen down a flight of stairs and disappeared. That she had spent 2 decades watching her daughter from a careful distance and shaping her into the kind of woman she wanted her to be. Solitary, special, monstrous, hers. She had killed Kang Tae's mother in that distant alley because Kang Tae's mother, sent to the castle as a housekeeper, had begun to suggest that Moon Young needed help. She had killed because her daughter was her artwork, and she would not allow her artwork to be touched. She had visited Kang Tae's previous hospital and slipped a knife into the room of an unstable patient named Mr. Kim. She'd encouraged him to take his own life. She'd gotten very good at this. She'd been close enough to her daughter the entire time to brush Moon Young's hair. Had Moon Young only known to recognise her face beneath the surgeries? She had kept Park Oak Ran on a string of note cards. She had given Sang Tae a giant stuffed dinosaur as a gift. She had painted the butterfly on the mural to make sure her daughter understood, finally, who she belonged to. Sang Tae, blameless, had brought her his porridge when Moon Young could not eat. He had crouched beside her and fed her with a spoon and told her he would forgive her if she ate. Moon Young had wept. She had told him this was all her fault. He had wiped her tears with his hand and told her not to fight with Kang Tae anymore, because kissing is better than fighting. Then he had told Kang Tae everything, and he and Kang Tae and Jae-soo had hugged on the stairs like brothers, all 3 of them, and Sang Tae had promised that as the older brother he would protect both of them. The plan, when Moon Young finally formed one, was simple and reckless and entirely her own. She made arrangements with Sang-in to publish her mother's lost final novel, the manuscript her mother had been searching for since she'd vanished. She knew that publishing it would draw her mother out of hiding. She wanted to confront the butterfly herself. She wanted to spare Kang Tae and Sang Tae from facing it. But Huijie moved first. She called Sang Tae, who had known her only as the kind nurse who'd given him the dinosaur. He met her on the street. "You look different today," he said. "That's right," she said, smiling. "I'm a different person." She gave him something to drink. She drove him home. When Kang Tae found Sang Tae's last sketch on the desk, the mutant butterfly, and answered his brother's ringing phone, Huijie's voice was on the other end. "Where do I have to go?" Kang Tae asked. "The cursed castle," she said. He told Sang-in to drive Moon Young as far away as possible. He went alone. By the time Moon Young realised where Sang-in was not taking her, by the time she screamed his name and grabbed the wheel and forced him to the side of the road, by the time she ran back along the highway in her bare feet, weeping, crying out Kang Tae's name, Kang Tae was already inside the cursed castle. Huijie stood in the study. Sang Tae was unconscious on the couch. The family portrait hung on the wall behind her, the 3 of them smiling. She turned to look at Kang Tae and laughed. She presented him with a choice the way a witch in a fairy tale presents a choice. She would let him go. She would let him take his brother and run as far away from her daughter as he wanted, because that was what was best for Moon Young. Or, she said, smiling, he could kill her and avenge his mother, and Moon Young would be returned to her old self, and everyone could have a happy ending. He told her to give up that ending. He told her he was not running anywhere. He told her that Moon Young was not her artwork, and not her property, and not anyone's monster, but a person. She told him then that Moon Young was the reason his mother had died, that his mother had been killed because she had begun to suggest Moon Young needed help, That's it, he said, his voice breaking. Because of one thing she said? He lunged at her. He took her by the throat. He began, almost without realizing it, to choke her. And as he did, Hee-jae smiled and encouraged him and called him weak. He remembered, in the middle of his own rage, something Moon Young had told him on a drunken night after her father had died. That despite everything, despite all of it, Hee-jae was still her mother. That she could not stop seeing her that way, even now. He let go. Hee-jae stabbed a tranquilizer into his side. He went to his knees. Moon Young burst through the door at a dead run, took in the room, and lifted a fountain pen off the desk. She told her mother she was not like her. She came at her with the pen. Kang-tae, even half paralyzed, pulled himself up and put his bandaged hand into the path of the blade. "You promised," he said softly, and fell forward into her arms. Hee-jae grabbed her daughter by the hair. She picked up the pen. She raised it. And Sang-tae, quiet, brave, trembling Sang-tae, who had been awake longer than anyone realized, and who had spent every day of his life carrying the fear of butterflies, hit her over the head with a book and shouted, "Don't hurt my siblings." She fell. The police, summoned by Director O, were already on their way down the long forest road. They came in and took her into custody without much resistance. She was still laughing as they led her out the front door of the cursed castle. "I've already won," she told Director O as she passed him. "They're too weak to stay together." He answered her, and he answered her well. People stay together because they're weak. It's what makes them human. When will you become human? The car drove away into the dark. What followed was harder than what came before. In the strange way a long convalescence is harder than a single sharp wound. Moon Young, the next day, told Kang-tae to move out. She told him she wasn't an empty can. She had feelings, she said, and she could not forget how much she had made the brothers suffer. She knew they would not be able to forget either. She was, of course, doing what monsters always do in fairy tales, protecting the people she loved by sending them away. He saw straight through her. He told her so. He told her that she was just a kid longing to be loved, and that she should admit it. She would not. She went under the covers of the bed. He stalked out of the room. The plan came together slowly over a series of phone calls. It involved Juri's mother, Sang-in, Jae-soo, and Juri. It involved a small lie, that Juri's mother was sick, and a meal, lovingly prepared, waiting for Moon Young when she walked through the door of the apartment building. It involved Juri's mother taking the day off. It involved the warmth of strangers who had, somewhere along the way, become not strangers. Moon Young sat at the table, and Juri's mother put food in front of her and told her that the brothers had set this up, that all of this was for her, that everything about her was lovable, especially the fact that she liked Kang-tae for who he was. Moon Young blinked away her tears. She ate. Kang-tae and Sang-tae that day planted a tree in the hospital garden in their mother's honour. They hung a small ornament with the family portrait on its branches. Sang-tae told their mother, wherever she was, that they had grown up well. "You heard that right, Mom?" Kang-tae whispered. That night, Moon Young came home tipsy and tired. She found Sang-tae waiting on the stairs. She agreed, finally, to look at his drawings. He turned to a page he had not shown her before. The sketch of Kang-tae smiling in his sleep. "It's a happy expression," he said. "He smiled like this after he told me he liked someone." She wept. She asked if she could keep it. The next morning she went to the hospital and stood in front of the brothers' tree and apologized to their mother. Kangtae found her there. He told her he was going to keep trying. He told her he was going to overcome this. And when she walked past him, he called out something he had never called out before in his life. "I love you. I love you. Go Moon Young." She walked on, almost without breaking stride, the way she'd walked once before on a different road. He chased after her, shouting it now, the same way she had shouted it at his retreating back on a quiet road months before. And finally, in the study of the cursed castle, with the wilted bouquet from their trip drying slowly on the desk, he kissed her and asked her, breathless, if he had meant it when she had said she would never let him go. She didn't answer in words. She did not need to. A deer cried somewhere in the forest outside, and Kangtae yelled at it to shut up, and Moon Young laughed against his mouth, and they kissed and laughed and kissed again. She made him stay. She'd been waiting 20 years to make him stay. In the morning, he found her in the kitchen and told her he had quit his job at the hospital and was thinking of going to school. She told him she was retiring as a writer. He told her he'd been looking forward to her next book. She showed him Sangtai's drawing of his sleeping smile and told him that this expression, the real happy Moon Kangtae, had changed her mind. There would be another book. She would write it. She went to see her mother in the county jail one final time. Hui Jai, smug behind the glass, told her the brothers would never stay with her. Moon Young told her, without theatrics, that she had almost turned into a demon like her, and was so relieved she had not. "I pity you," she said, "because you've never known warmth, and you've never tried. You should remember something. The word psyche, in ancient Greek, can mean butterfly, or it can mean psycho. To us, butterflies mean cure. A cure that heals our soul. Remember that." She walked out. She didn't look back. Sangtai had begun, by then, to paint over the butterfly. He had not erased it. He had simply covered it with one of his own. A beautiful one. "That's right," Moon Young said when she saw it. "We just have to cover up the bad with something better." There were small joys after that. Director Oh, after a long therapy career of failing to discipline his own son, dragged Cha-Yong out of a supply closet by the ear, and the entire hospital learned, with delighted disbelief, that the prickly young caregiver was the director's only child. Sang In, after a long campaign of fumbled affection, sat on a bench beside Juri and reached very slowly for her pinky. They held pinkies. It was, somehow, more romantic than any kiss the show had allowed itself. The new book, when it was finally published, was called Finding the Real Face. It had Sangtai's name on the cover beside Moon Young's. He took the very first copy to the brothers' tree at the hospital and read it aloud to their mother. The book told the story of a masked boy, an emotionless princess, and a man trapped inside a cardboard box, whose faces had been stolen by a witch, and who set out together to find them. Along the way, the masked boy met a mother fox who had lost her child in the snow, and wept on her behalf until the snow melted. The princess met a clown dancing naked in a field of thorns, and joined him, because that was the only way he could be seen. In the end, the witch caught them and locked them in a tunnel too narrow for the box-headed man to enter. "I need to take this box off my head," he told them. He was afraid. He had been wearing the box his whole life, but he took it off, and he crawled into the tunnel, and he saved them. When they emerged, The masked boy and the emotionless princess saw the man's bare face for the first time, smudged with dirt, and they laughed, and the boy's mask fell off, and the princess's hollow can clattered away, and the man looked at them and said simply, "I'm happy." The book ended with one quiet sentence. What the witch had stolen from them was not their real faces, but their courage to find happiness. Director, that afternoon, surprised the three of them with a gift. A camping car. The camping car Sang-tae had wanted from the very first illustration contract he had ever signed. There was, briefly, a misunderstanding in which Moon Young and Sang-tae pretended they did not want to go on a road trip, just to torment Kang-tae. He drank himself sad about it with Jae-soo and Sang-in. He came home wasted and pitiful. He found them waiting in the living room with packed suitcases and matching family t-shirts, and he burst into tears, and he hugged them. The trip was as ordinary as any trip and as miraculous as any trip ever filmed. They drove. They sang. They argued. Kang-tae was hungover. Sang-tae corrected Moon Young's slang. The little doll Mang-tae swung from the rearview mirror. One night, by a fire, Moon Young curled up against Kang-tae's shoulder and apologised for ever hurting him. She told him that she loved him. Not fake. Real. He smiled into her hair. They slept warm. The morning that ended the road trip came without warning. Sang-tae, packing his own bag, told Kang-tae that he wanted to go home. Another author had reached out to him. Sang-in was already on his way to come pick him up. He wanted Moon Young and Kang-tae to keep going on without him. Kang-tae, eyes already filling, asked his brother quietly whether he would really truly be all right, whether he would not need him anymore. Moon Kang-tae belongs to Moon Kang-tae, Sang-tae said simply. Just like you said when we were little. Kang-tae cried. He thanked his brother for being his brother. Sang-tae stood up and wiped his tears away with his hand, gently, and held him for a long time without saying anything. Beside them, Moon Young's eyes filled too. Sang-in's car pulled up at the side of the road. Sang-tae waved cheerfully as he climbed in, and called back over his shoulder for Moon Young and Kang-tae to take care, and not to fight, and to remember that a kiss is better than a fight. And then his car drove away in one direction, and the camping car drove away in the other. The boy who had spent his whole life believing he existed only to look after another person was, at last, allowed to belong to himself. The brother who had spent his whole life being looked after had decided on his own that he could carry the lighter half of the load now. The girl in the cursed castle, who had been told her whole life that no one would ever stay, had a family. A real one. Imperfect. Loud. Occasionally arguing about quail eggs. Occasionally arguing about hairstyles. A real one. A few moments after the cars went their separate ways, Sang-tae walked back across the gravel to the camping car and asked his brother and his sister to please have just one cup of coffee with him before they left. Kang-tae and Moon Young looked at each other for a long second, and then they laughed. That is where the story ended, and that is where, perhaps, all stories like this should end, not with a wedding, not with a triumph, not with the loud certainty of something fixed forever, but with three imperfect people choosing, in a quiet morning, to share one more cup of coffee. If you have stayed with us this long, we hope the story has been a kind of company. We hope that somewhere in the long quiet of these 16 episodes, something small and warm landed for you the way it landed for us. Good night, and thank you for listening.